Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. So today we are taking an eye-opening journey into a concept that is just absolutely everywhere right now. I'm sure you've heard it at coffee shops, seen it trending all over social media, or maybe, you've even used it yourself to describe an annoying ex or a really difficult boss. We're talking about narcissism. Okay, let's dive right into this because what you're about to discover is that the true hidden meaning of narcissism is actually vastly different and honestly far more tragic than the modern buzzword we just casually toss around today.
It's a pretty fair question to ask, isn't it? Like, in our digital age, is absolutely everyone who takes a selfie, runs a YouTube channel, or carefully curates an Instagram feed suffering from a clinical personality disorder? We've kind of reached a point of image obsession where modern vanity just seems indistinguishable from pathology. But think about it. If simply wanting to look good or feeling proud of your achievements makes you a narcissist, well, then who isn't one? Does wanting to feel confident mean you have a psychological disorder, or is true narcissism actually something much darker?
Section 1, the myth of narcissism today. All right, picture this. Let's say you go on a date with a guy, we'll just call him Medhat. You sit down together for 4 hours. For 3 of those hours, Medhat talks exclusively about himself, his crypto portfolio, his recent promotions, the whole shebang. And during the 1 hour he actually leaves for you, he uses it to tell you how incredibly lucky you are to be sitting across from him. He belittles your opinions, criticizes your choice of appetizer, and seems completely obsessed with catching his own reflection in the restaurant window. We look at this kind of behavior and immediately stamp it with the big N word, narcissist. We just assume it's someone who loves themselves way, way too much. But here's the thing, you kind of have to forget everything social media has taught you about true narcissism. Those pop psychology stereotypes you find online are literally just the tip of the iceberg. And honestly, they miss the entire point of the actual pathology. True psychology goes so much deeper than that, and to really understand it, we have to travel far back in time. Section 2, the true story of Narcissus. So the actual tragedy of Narcissus unfolds pretty methodically. First, Narcissus, who is this capable, handsome hunter, decides he simply no longer needs his loyal friends, and he completely isolates himself deep in the wilderness. Out there in this isolation, he meets Echo. Now, if we look at the psychological reading of this myth, Echo isn't just some random girl in the woods. She is a literal echo of his own voice. She represents his true self. But when Echo tries to embrace him, Narcissus is absolutely terrified. He violently rejects her with utter disgust. Finally, running away, he finds this silver lake, sees his superficial reflection, and becomes so mesmerized by this flawless image that he just stays there, starving until he dies.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the popular belief that Narcissus fell in love with his true self. But the psychoanalytic truth, the actual plot twist of the story, is that Narcissus hated his true self. When his authentic self, represented by Echo, tried to embrace him, he was completely repulsed. He didn't love who he actually was. He only loved that flawless, superficial reflection in the water. So true narcissism is not rooted in a deep self-love. It's actually rooted in deep, terrifying self-loathing. The reflection is literally just a shield to hide the ugliness they feel inside.
Which brings us to Section 3, the roots of narcissism in childhood. Let's compare 2 foundational psychological theories on how our ego actually develops. So Sigmund Freud believed babies are born with what he called primary narcissism. Think of it kind of like a psychological bodyguard. Every child thinks they're the absolute center of the universe, like a tiny superhero. And that protects them until they grow up, face reality, and the bodyguard just naturally steps down. But psychoanalyst Michael Balint offered a different and honestly much more heartbreaking view. He argued that a narcissistic ego is a secondary reaction. It happens when a child suffers early emotional neglect or abuse. So the really absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. According to Balint, the child learns to obsessively love themselves because the world completely failed to love them. It's just a tragically flawed defense mechanism they created just to survive. Because this ego was built on a really shaky foundation of childhood damage, it manifests in adults in very specific, noticeable ways. Balint observed that these individuals are extremely highly sensitive. Any little slight feels like a massive threat to their fragile reflection. They are prone to impulsive, childlike rage. If you take away a child's toy, they scream, right? Well, if you threaten a narcissist's self-image, they explode. And finally, they are essentially incapable of ever being satisfied. No matter how much love, praise, or validation you pour into them, it's literally like pouring water into a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. The love just drains right out. Section 4, the narcissist's anger and shadow. To really wrap our heads around this explosive anger, we need to bring Carl Jung into the conversation. Jung coined this term called the shadow self. This is the unconscious part of our personality where we bury all our repressed, socially unacceptable emotions and dark desires. When a child is abused or punished for expressing completely natural anger, they learn really quickly that those feelings are dangerous. So they hide that anger deep, deep inside the shadow self, just burying it behind a carefully constructed, socially acceptable mask.
And this shadow self operates out in the real world through a defense mechanism called projection. It works like this. First, they repress their dark flaws into the shadow. Second, they become entirely blind to their own defects. Like they literally cannot see them anymore. But here's the kicker in the third step. Because that dark energy still has to go somewhere, they become expert hunters at finding and viciously criticizing those exact same flaws in everyone around them. They are literally attacking in you what they secretly despise in themselves.
Now, when that fragile illusion is threatened, it triggers what psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut defined as narcissistic rage. And guys, this isn't normal anger. Normal anger has an evolutionary purpose. Narcissistic rage is a totally disproportionate, vengeance-fueled anger triggered by the tiniest, most minor insults. And its defining feature? A complete, absolute lack of empathy for the target. They have this compulsive thirst for revenge. What's even more fascinating and scary is that this rage can sometimes disguise itself behind noble causes. Like someone might use religion, societal reform, or really high ideals as a convenient excuse to unleash their hidden punitive rage on the world.
Which brings us to the year 2018. The World Health Organization's International Classification of Diseases, the ICD-11, considered a pretty major shift. They looked at grouping all personality disorders together rather than listing them separately. Why? Well, because over the years, the medical definitions had become pretty blurry. But more importantly, labels like narcissist were increasingly being weaponized. I mean, the great psychoanalysts didn't spend their entire lives researching these complex traumas just so we could use clinical terms as insults to stigmatize our political opponents, our exes, or our bosses. The true purpose of identifying this disorder was always meant to be healing. And finally, Section 5, Breaking the Cycle of Abuse. Every single person who suffers deep childhood wounds or emotional neglect eventually faces a crossroads. Path 1 is the victim and perpetrator cycle. This is the belief that just because you were hurt, you are fated to hurt others. You take the abuse you suffered and you project it outward, seeking revenge on a world that failed you. But path 2, that's the hero's choice. This is the incredibly difficult, monumental decision to transcend the trauma, to refuse to pass the pain on to the next generation, and to actively choose empathy and forgiveness instead. Because here is the absolute truth. Empathy is the ultimate rebellion against trauma. True heroism lies in recognizing that perpetrators, yes, even those acting out with cruel narcissistic traits, are often just damaged, neglected children themselves, trapped in adult bodies. Let's be real. It is so much easier to just be angry and seek revenge. It takes monumental strength to look at a vicious cycle of abuse and decide, no, this stops with me. So I'm going to leave you with a question to really chew on. Are you using the word narcissist just to win an argument, dismiss someone, and feel superior? Or now that you actually understand the deep, tragic roots of this behavior, are you ready to replace internet judgment with profound human empathy? Next time you encounter someone desperately seeking their reflection in the waters of public approval, remember Narcissus. Remember the neglected child hiding behind the mask. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.